Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Leadership Lanes. This is the first of the data analytics series, and we have a very exciting guest today, Stuart Ogawa. With over 25 years of big data and analytics expertise, Stuart has spearheaded innovation across diverse companies from VC-backed startups to multi-billion-dollar enterprises. As a seasoned leader in global research, product, and engineering, his insights leveraging and applying AI, data science, and big data drive top-line organization revenue growth. Welcome to the podcast, Stuart. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
And we have a co-host today with us, Karan Patharkar, an up-and-coming data analyst and scientist. He loves using creative solutions to tackle challenges, which is what drew him to this field and keeps him passionate about his work. Welcome to the podcast, Karan.
Thank you, Abhijit. Good to be here.
Pleasure to have you as well. So let's start with you, Karan. I guess over to you first, and then I'll take it up once you're done.
Sure. Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you, Stuart, again for joining us. I can't wait to get started to dig into your experiences and insights, right? So let's just get started with it. Knowing your past experiences and extensive experience in the field of analytics, first I would like to delve more into your past insights. So back in the punch card days, what was the biggest analytics aha moment for you that totally changed the way you approach data?
Yeah, so that was a while back. So I'm a dinosaur. Just the fact that you're even bringing this up exposes how old I am. So I'm pre-dinosaur age in the computing world. The back then in the 80s, when I started getting involved with this late 70s, early 80s, we had something that looked like a typewriter that actually would punch the cards, and then you'd have readers. And so one of the things that I think the aha moment was you were able to basically express or write an algorithm and then input data and then have it being read out, and doing it, just the fact that you can do it automatically, faster, better, that were more complex, basic arithmetic calculations, but the fact that you could do it much faster with these punch cards was kind of an aha moment. It wasn't necessarily analytics, but the fact that you can come to some out calculation as a result of that was a big aha moment for me.
Indeed, that
Just
sounds like a good, sorry.
Good. Sorry, just to follow up on this, and since Karan, you started with the punch card days, so a quick thought on. I would like to have a bit of an insight on Moore's law here. So typically, when it started, Moore's law now seems to be a bit outdated, I would say, with the kind of technological advances that has happened. So your thoughts on how processing power and compute has kind of evolved across these decades in order to be what we are today.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people talk about, depending on who you read about or you experience, um, one of the things that seems to me that underpins this big leap forward is the economics of it. Probably the biggest leap here was during the 2000s, that decade. And it was really a confluence of economics that drove a lot of these big leaps and bounds. So, for example, the big three that I think about is like Moore's Law, and the fact that you were able to pack a lot more switches onto silicon at a cheaper cost. That drove computing costs down on the hardware side. And then obviously occurred well before the 2000s, but that was a major vector. I think two was really the introduction in the late 90s and 2000s, or was open source software. Prior to that, it was a lot of proprietary frameworks. And I remember when we were first doing our first internet startup, we were one of the first companies that was VC backed that actually used FreeBSD and Linux in production. And that was the first time back in '99, when I'd experienced using that, and the cost of being able to have massive number of servers without having to purchase proprietary expensive operating systems, whether it was Microsoft or Sun Microsystems. Those were the two big ones that we used in the Valley at that time. So we saw that the rise of open source and that becoming a steady state. I think that was another major factor that we saw as that I saw this evolutionary leap in confluence with the hardware. And I think the third economic driver was broadband internet and cloud computing. Salesforce.com back then, when they started out in the early 2000s, was the first company to really market that they were a cloud-based company. And that was part of their no software circle marquee. And said no software, it was all cloud-based. And so that became also a kind of a steady state versus having your own co-location centers and data centers where I used to run all of our, big heavy iron in these centers. The cost of that computing also went down. So the confluence of those three areas of Moore's law, open source, and then these cloud-based and broadband internet, which also went down quite a bit. Those three legs of the stool really made the big jump, I think, in analytic computing, that evolutionary leap.
That was insightful, actually. Thanks on answering that, Stuart. Karan, over to you.
Yeah. So yeah, again, thank you, Stuart, for answering that, right? But if you were to pinpoint one single point in this whole evolutionary leap in analytics that like totally disrupted this whole field and might be considered as a groundbreaking discovery, would there be a single point that you could highlight according to you?
Can I ask a clarity question around single point? Are you talking about a specific technology or period of time?
A period of time would be fine.
Yeah, I still think that period of time when you had the confluence, that I answered before about Moore's law and the open source, that cloud computing. I mean, I was working back at a company called Teradata. Before there was big data, there was Teradata, and they had already been doing a lot of those analytics. They were already using a lot of inexpensive hardware, Intel-based servers. We did have proprietary data as an operating system, but that period of time during the 2000s, we saw that big changeover to, for example, like Hadoop. I remember doing research on Hadoop when I was there at Teradata in like 2007 to 8 period of time. Flash memory was just starting to take off. I mean, it did not take off, but that's when I saw beginning to actually see very large scale flash memory storage drives coming across. So I think that period of time making analytics widely available to more small, medium-sized businesses or large businesses as opposed to just enterprise, that was kind of the formative period. Probably, in fact, between 2005 to 2008, that time frame specifically would probably when you started to see Hadoop come about for big data. You already had math and science available for analytics. We were doing that. Clearly, Teradata was doing that before I arrived there, but being able to see that occur on more inexpensive hardware and making that transition to inexpensive servers and cloud computing, that was probably that. And then, of course, Moore's law was already driving. That was a major driver to that. But I think that specific time that I saw across different organizations, and previously I was at banks, just some publicly traded banks as well, where we were still running on heavy, mainframes where you still were doing a lot of banking transactions on those systems. They hadn't converted over yet for a variety of different reasons, but that period of time was very, very formative in that period of time. And my days at Yahoo, as an example, I got to meet some of the guys who actually Eric Balderschweiler, Eric 14, actually wrote Hadoop, and so I got to work with Eric both during and after his time there at Yahoo. Mike Shield was also there at Yahoo, who built the actual infrastructure that ran Hadoop. And so Mike actually worked for me for a while as well. So I got to meet some of these guys who were really there at the very beginning days of big data and capturing that data. And I think, again, with the math and science that we're seeing, that was already there. That confluence, that 2005 to 8 period of time seemed to me fairly instrumental, at least in my eyes. I could be wrong, but that's what I observed compared to what I was seeing in the industry. I don't know, Karan, if I'm answering your question, if
It's
I had narrowed down to that specific time, that would probably be the 3 years I would be able to point out.
Actually, it's It's very interesting that you say that you take the 2005 to 2008, because 2008 was when I passed out of engineering, so I can actually relate the kind of technological advances that happened at that time. And interesting also because that was a time where the whole world was reeling in a recession mode, and tech was kind of not affected by any of those noises that were happening during that time. So that's quite fascinating and interesting.
Right. You had the mortgage crisis, the mortgage
Yeah.
meltdown. That was driving a lot of that. But the cost, I mean, I think when that was occurring, that was even driving it even faster in the technology side to come down cheaper computing. And that, I think, because of that economic downturn, the mortgage crisis, everyone was feeling the heat across the board. And how do we get to reducing these big data center costs? I mean, Yahoo had its own data centers along with, a lot of other, at that time, the Googles, the Facebooks, everyone had their own data centers that moved towards more cloud-based computing. They have shared computing costs on demand. Was probably, again, another economic driver. How do we reduce costs out of it? So that's why these technologies kind of came about.
That was interesting, Stu. I think you narrowed it down quite a bit for me as well to for that answer. Looking a bit forward to, right? What are some of the most exciting trends in analytics that you see today, and how do you see them evolving in the coming years?
Great question. Making today, and I'll break it down into today and then the near future, because things are moving so quickly. I'm not a forecaster, predictor, tea leaf reader, but and so going into the future, whatever that means, is that n plus 10 years, n plus 5 years. I'm terrible at doing that, but I can see what's happening probably today in the near future, what's starting to come around. So I can probably answer to those two cohorts. I think today, I was teaching some courses at different universities throughout the United States, and one of the things that I did get to observe today, back in Q1 of 23. So if you rewind and think about how seminal that year was, that period of time, I was fortunate to be given the opportunity to use OpenAI December 1, 22. That's right when they opened. I won the lotto and they gave me that. And so I was playing with that back then. And then I decided that in the courses I was teaching, I was going to incorporate the GPT LLMs into the coursework. And so the exciting trend, I think, answering that was one of the things that has always been when I'm having to present data to senior executives, customers, is, well, this is great that you show me all of these charts and these lines and the predictions, and you provide all that mathematical explainability. But a lot of times the people who are the audience don't have context. They may not understand all of the p-values that we're using or the risk analysis. How did you come up with these ARIMA models? That's just over their head, but they can see the general trend, but they want to have some other explainability. And that's in layman's terms, frankly. And provide me some other data from outside that are from trusted data sources that also help me reinforce or reject what we're seeing here in the graphs, which may in fact be true. We incorporated during the course I was teaching during 23, Q1 on through Q3 of 23, having the students pull out GPT-driven internet results from trusted data sources to provide explainability from these 3 or 4 different well-known entities who do trusted reporting that also reinforce the data that we're seeing. So if we see a large dip that we saw in COVID in June, 2020, as an example, well, we're just hitting it home. Here's when the U.S. government had decided that that's the period of time when we're going to start doing shutdowns, and you had the health CDC involved with this. So we're having these different data points that provide this very thorough contextual understanding of why you saw oil and gas industry completely just shut down. And that was one of the industries we had students research, but it's providing, we see these numbers occurring, and here's the explainability. No one's traveling. Everyone's locked down. That's the reason why you're seeing a huge drop in oversupply in oil and gas. You saw drops in prices, and then there's just no one traveling. There's no more fuel being used by airplanes and cars. So providing that type of explainability automatically with the traditional analytics that we're seeing with math, the traditional math, that's probably the biggest trends I'm seeing right now. I know that not all industries are doing that, but that was what I was already going with back in Q1 of 23. So that seems almost a year ago, a year and a half ago, but it's not that long ago. But in my mind, it seems like a long ago. But I've already been observing that. I think answering the second cohort question, what do we see in the future? Well, I'll say near future. This may go against a lot of what a lot of people say, but this is just my opinion. I think 80% of the traditional business analyst development work is going to be gone, frankly. I've already been writing prompts that why would I pay someone that's coming out of school? Sorry, Karan, no, nothing to, no harm, no foul, but just being honest. If I can write them in 3 to 4 days, why would I hire someone in the first year out of school, first 2, 3 years out of school to do that work? I'm not the only one that's thinking about that. And I know a lot of the big companies in the Valley are already doing a lot of stuff with automation, whether it's unit testing for software, writing scripts, it's being done. Now, on the analytics side, I mean, you're already seeing some of these LLMs that are being written that will automatically write the SQL, not just Python, right? It's not a question of if, it's when. So I think the future is going to be, you're going to see more of that part of that area. I think where there's going to be room for growth, though, it's going to become a forcing function when you start seeing those type of analytic automations occurring. It's going to require people that were just specifically trained in data science to become a lot more business side savvy. They need to know industry so they can provide context around not just providing the numbers and being able to do the Python, or like I was teaching in some of the classes, like graph database work. We're now using, in my current company, Procera, we're using already RAG and Pinecone. Even when we use these types of tools, I have to prompt it, write the right prompts that are going to consequently provide plain English in layman's terms explainability. And so I think that those guardrails or that type of thinking only comes from human beings. That's what I call the last mile in AI computing, is really still the person. That's going to become much more important because people buy products. Computers don't buy products. Okay? People buy services. Computers don't buy services. And so that's the last mile equivalent, is that being able to provide that last mile of thought work, combining both, or across discipline, really deeply knowing a specific industry and how things really work in the real world, aside from what they see in the internet, and then combine that with GPT or LLMs for analytic purposes in predictions, recommendations. That's where I think that tomorrow is going to be, or the near future is going to be. Sorry, it was a little bit long-winded, Karan, but that's how I kind of break up the world in my world.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating, actually. As you said that you trained a group of graduates, right? I was fortunate enough to be one of those, so I know what you're talking about. I have experienced it firsthand. So yeah, when you say that data analysts and scientists are not going to be there, or they like it's going to be a shortage in terms of their expertise. So I get what you're trying to say, and you've been telling that for a while now. So I get that.
Yeah, and
So,
I don't
but I'm
I was
yeah,
going
go
to
ahead,
just say,
go
I
ahead.
didn't mean that they're going to all go away. There's still going to be
Yeah,
many. The volume,
yeah,
the numbers, right, aren't going to be, we're training a lot more people than they're going to be positions for. Uh, they don't go away. They become different or differentiated, but the volumes that we have may not be the same demand. So if you're looking at the supply and demand side of where we're training people, that is going to be, I think a lot of people are experiencing that right now in industry, is that there's a vast larger supply than there's demand, and it's in the near future you'll start seeing that demand side increasingly decrease. So just try to be clear on that.
yeah.
Uh, do you think this AI revolution was an after effect of the supply demand gap that was created in 2021? Because 2021 was a time where there was a huge demand for engineers, but there wasn't enough supply. And was it something that the industry responded to that, or was it just technology coming its age?
No, short answer is no. It had not. I don't think it had anything. It's been there. They've been working on generalized artificial intelligence for quite a while. I mean, Professor Hinton at Hinton Labs,
Mm.
he'd been working, arguably the grandfather of modern day AI companies, been working on this. In fact, in many decades, it was a big struggle as to whether or not they could get to this point. So the short answer, the COVID in 2020 had nothing to do really with that. It was already long in the making. The questions, there were some breakthroughs out, more recent breakthroughs that are occurring. The natural ebb and flow of any new type of technology sometimes takes a lot longer, measured decades, and that's clearly this is one where they've been working on this quite a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad though that you brought the topic of AI. That gives me a good segue for my second question, next question. So as AI rises, do you think there are any skills and approaches that are going to be relevant from the analytics 1.0 period, which are in the new era?
I think I may not be answering the question directly because I don't, the 1.0 era of analytics would go way back in time, right? Well before the internet. There was a lot of companies. I mean, if you go back to insurance companies doing statistics, morticians, that's analytics. They're trying to figure out when you're going to die, and that's going to write. They're going to make money figuring out when you're going to die. That's analytics. We might have done it on mainframes. We might have done it on slide rules, but that's been around for quite a while. So I think, though, to answer the question about what I'm seeing differently in the new world of analytics in the 1.0 would be it's how we approach. I've been experimenting with writing a lot of prompts for the current company I'm at Procera, and one of the things we're doing with Procera involves doing recommended coaching directly to people using a lot of the brain, what I've experienced for the past 30 plus years, and a lot of very senior people that we've pulled together for our board of advisors and board of directors, making recommendations for people's career growth from cradle to grave. So from the point they get out of college to the end. And many times when you're doing that type of social psychographic and mentoring for people, you can't use traditional approaches like trying to do traditional software development, even agile software development, what we've typically done. While that could be used in what we're doing, it's not a very efficient way of doing that type of development. And so as I look back, one of the ways I was trying to solve some of these problems, answering one of the age-old questions, what do I want to do when I grow up? Well, imagine trying to answer that question for people at scale around the world. And I attempted to try to use a more 1.0 approach as opposed to this analytics approach, but just a traditional software development approach. And it was not a very good, I wasn't satisfied with the results. So I actually went backwards in time. I like reading a lot of books, especially autobiographies or biographies. And one of them happened to take me back into Michelangelo, back in time. And so when Michelangelo or any of those artists of that period, the Renaissance period of time, would say, for example, paint something, or in Michelangelo's case also was a sculptor, they already had a pretty clear idea in their mind what success looked like, what the art was going to look like before they laid one tool. And I'm doing that actually. That is my approach that I found very successful, is if I can see what success looks like in a person because I've seen other people doing these things, or I have other board advisors or mentors that are doing this type of work, we can see these gifts that people have and where they could potentially go. Will we be a prophet and know exactly? No, absolutely not. But we can give a lot of directional hints. And so we work backwards. So that's exactly what I'm doing with the prompts. I work backwards in defining what success might look like by asking questions. And then here's your map. So writing prompts or working backwards is how I write a lot of prompts now, which is very different from a lot of the other analytic tools that I've done historically. Like you start building data, get the data sets, do a data transform to clean up the data, You know, there's a certain method you could spend 70% of my time cleaning up data and then merging data before I can even do any data science on it, which we experienced Karan, and we talked a lot about that in classes. But when you work with these AI tools and working backwards, and assuming you had clean data, it's a very different approach. You already have a vision what Michelangelo is or an artist is doing, and then working backwards. You find the same simile metaphorically with a lot of other musicians and artists, the non-STEM people who have an idea and then they're just using whatever art gifts that they have and tools to come up and write and draw or sculpt or make what's already envisioned in their heads. So it's working backwards. So I've been taking that approach. So that's probably something different. That's kind of going back, not just analytics 1.0, but I'm going back to the 16th, 17th centuries, going far back in time, well before what we thought about, to rethinking how we go about developing it. And so far, that's been pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, since we got this AI discussion kickstarted, and I know, Stuart, you talked about open source a bit, and I totally agree that open source did revolutionize a lot of things, how industry looks at technology in general. One question I typically had in mind when it came to AI and open source is a lot, actually. Most of the algorithms or models right now in AI are proprietary. Do you foresee open source revolution having an open source revolution in the AI modeling space as well? I know it's a bit complex to understand for majority of the folks out there, but do you see that revolution happen in AI models as well?
I think the short answer is yes. I think when you start looking backwards in time, in the early days of Linux, arguably probably an anchor for open source, right? At least a moment in time, and going forwards to you move across the software stack on up. We've continued to see some important work in different technologies, and AI being one of them, having some open source element to it. And I'm failing to remember the UC Berkeley, which is now renamed. It used to be called the AMP Lab, and I know I'm having a brain fart right now. I can't remember the new lab. They've renamed it, but it's all about AI, and it's open source, where they're developing a lot of. I mean, that's where Hadoop and Spark, for example. I was one of the early users of Spark. That came out of the AMP Lab, and in fact, Eric Balchweiler turned me on to that because he was out of Berkeley and he was familiar with that work. He was involved with that work. They're now, of course, taking that next level work into the AI, LLM, all those other spaces. And you see that with, in fact, the guys who are developing RAG, right? Those guys are, a lot of those guys are out of Berkeley. So the short answer is that type of work is clearly there's going to be some elements of that. I think there's going to be other areas where they will be proprietary. And we see that again with even open source. I mean, the fact that when we're using OpenAI as an example, their API, there is specific areas that when you use the API, they're not going to use that as training data. And that's a requirement for a lot of companies. You don't want PII information going out about you and your financial transactions or what's happening at banks or critical other infrastructure. So there's going to be proprietary nature of some of this data, and that some of those prompts will not be going out in the open source. So how to model that, the data that you use again for that. Again, I think there's already a lot of similarities of what we do now, but without AI, that would have been proprietary. For example, when I'm purchasing data, for example, if I'm buying from Dun & Bradstreet data, or if I'm buying data from Zoom or these other companies I could buy data from, this proprietary data that they've been harvesting. So I respect that, and we do the same thing. The data that we're creating and generating is proprietary. We're not willing to share that costs money. There are other areas where we've helped out at other startups where we were, in fact, in one company I was at, I was involved with the graph database. So that at that time it was called the Titan Graph. We were the ones that spent the money actually scaling that. I contributed back a major portion of at that time of money and code back into that open source project. That then I can't remember if it's DataStax or Databricks, one of them acquired that. But we had at that time back in 2014, 15, we had one of the largest known graph databases. I think it had about 1.2, 1.3 trillion edges, which was unheard of at that time, back a decade ago, frankly. So there are times we'll contribute back in, and there's other times, certain type of data is just for GDPR reasons, PII reasons, HIPAA reasons, you just don't want certain data going out. Some of the models that are closely tied to that are also proprietary. So I think, Abhijit, that you're going to see both. I don't think there's going to be a surprise. It's not going to be one or the other. There's going to be some hybrid, and it will vary. That mix or blend of how much it is depends on what industry you're in.
That's interesting to know, actually. Uh, so moving on to my next question. So this typically, again, pertaining to AI, and AI often gets romanticized of it being a magic bullet that would actually revolutionize the way we work or the way things work. So what are your thoughts on it, actually, when it comes to how are we looking more towards an existential, I wouldn't say a crisis, but more on the lines of our existence itself?
So let's be clear. There's good actors and there's bad actors. Since humankind started and was able to have fire to heat themselves, to cook, and then you move over time, it was used for good and bad purposes. Do we need to have some control and governance over that? Absolutely. And having spent in one company 9 months in a bunker fighting bad guys for 9 months and not knowing what the end is, I fully grokked the understanding of why you need to have certain organizations actively involved in helping those type of organizations from bad guys. I was in the trenches fighting with one of those for a long period of time. It's unpleasant. I can't even tell you how unpleasant that is. We don't need to go into that. I think AI is a tool. It does have some very unique characteristics, but they are tools. And you will have people using them for good reasons, and you'll have bad actors using it for bad reasons. I typically look at specific tools. AI is a unique set of tools, but all tools belong in my toolbox. I don't romanticize about tools. It's no more different than me getting really romantically in love with my oscilloscope or my soldering iron when I'm building DIY stereo amplifiers. The outcome of the sound is interesting to me. It's not the tools. So it's for my benefit. Enjoy music. So I look at AI tools no more different than, okay, it's an oscilloscope. It's a signal generator. Okay, it can do this. So that's kind of my general view on this. It's an important set of tools. It's the newest tools, but it's not a tool, and it's not always appropriate for all purposes. I think when people use words that romanticize AI, I think you immediately project overexuberance, and then read and interpreted by lay people leads to false hope. I was supposed to do that. I knew it was going to be terrible. The outcomes are just garbage. I don't want. I don't want. Right. So that's what happens when I think with any technology, not even the computing area, you start feeding a frenzy, and it leads to disappointment. It's a tool. No one to use it. I think the revolution that I really see happening is the rise of non-STEM backgrounds who are going to be the most positively impacted with AI. We already see that I'm already observing that quite a bit. You're now enabling someone through a browser to have access to English-based prompting that was previously unapproachable or too difficult, and they can get answers very, very quickly without having to have a deep STEM background. I think that's going to be if you look at artists, people in the arts, languages, social studies, those non-STEM backgrounds, they will probably be one of the big winners because it's now become very approachable to write what they need for their outcomes because they've already envisioned what that sculpted Michelangelo piece in their mind looks like. I think they will be the remarkable winners, and you're already seeing that in many of the different arts. The biggest area, again, it's working backwards. Now they got another tool. They have now a different type of tool brush for painting, sculpting. It's called AI for the artist. And so all those people who had not been in STEM are have access to that. I think that's where you're going to see the real revolutionary works coming about. And it's about time, frankly. I'm very, very happy for those folks. We've had our time in the STEM side. It's their time. And so I'm applauding and I'm watching on the sidelines, eating popcorn, watching this unfold, and very, very happy to see that those folks will be able to have something that's going to put them at a new level that previously was not available to them.
That is very, very interesting because, to be honest, you're not the first one coming on this podcast and saying this exact same thing. So we had Kit, who was the then CTO of VMware, come on one episode, and he also talked about the biggest takeaway being the accessibility of technology to the again, not he used the word non-engineering folks, but it kind of is STEM. So accessibility being the biggest takeaway, and technology is now more accessible to everyone, which was not the case a few years back. Okay, so I'll go on to my last question. So, in your wildest visions, actually, right, what is the most mind-blowing application of AI and analytics you can imagine impacting our world in the next 10 years? Now we framed the question actually in the next 10 years, but honestly, I've got a lot of feedback on this podcast itself live saying that when we talk about AI, you can't talk in years. So I will just change the question to say like 10 months.
Yeah, I was going to say 10 years is 10 lifetimes.
Yeah.
They're spot on, even when we're writing prompts, frankly, right now, and we're seeing the results. I can see it, you can see it change how it's interacting with your data in pleasant ways and surprising ways. Even throughout the day, writing the same prompts of how you're seeing that, you're seeing it change for mind-blowing applications. Again, I'm going to stricken that word because I don't know if I'm qualified to say what's mind-blowing or not. I can only say what I observe and what I work with. So they could be just completely pedestrian like Kleenex and say that's not very mind-blowing. So that's fair. So I'm not a fortune teller. I mentioned that before, but what I'm seeing and observing is the ability to provide very unique and personalized responses to questions at an individual level throughout the world. So like at Procera, for example, we've been running a lot of work helping people around the world with their careers. And, in a matter of 3 months or so, 3 or 4 months, we reached, gosh, it was close to 125 countries in the world out of the 196. I mean, I think the only places that we have not covered now is probably more than that. That was back in January. I think only the inner countries within the continent of Africa we haven't covered yet, but everywhere else we've covered someone. And what's been really interesting is we see an increase of the number of people that are using the application in these countries, and it's been very personalized. And we don't do any advertising. This was all literally viral. We don't pay for any SEO, AdWords. We're not doing any banners. It was purely word of mouth, and it just took off. And one of the things that our supposition is that we were providing very personalized and unique recommendations to people. And they started recommending it to their friends, and it just took off. We would have never been able to do that without AI. Specifically the GPT LLM models, like the OpenAI GPT, and we're using GPT, that framework, the 4 series. And there's no way, when I was doing some other types of AI-driven work back in 2015 to 2021 for Alzheimer's research we were doing, there's no way I could have been able to do this type of work with these type of outcomes with the hundreds of patients we were working with. Having it be able to take the context of literally taking my brain out and dumping the recommendations I would give to students or peers into the prompt. So I'm basically, I mentioned this to a lot of our folks, and some people in your audience may or may not know who the Blue Man Group is. It's a rock band called the Blue Man Group. Yeah, they all wear blue faces and they have these songs, and it's really not a rock band as much as it's a show. Having attended those when it originally started out in New York and then gone to the Las Vegas shows. And I've always been the reason why I mentioned the Blue Man Group is because the thing that I always took away from that and I learned is that there's not just three people. They actually have both male and female and of all ethnicities that are the Blue Man Group. A lot of people didn't know that. I was always fascinated that they were able to clone themselves as an act. And that led me to the thinking of I wanted to clone myself. Can I clone myself so I could scale? The LLM prompts enable me to do that. And the outcomes of 120 plus countries, 2,400 cities and towns around the world is showing that I've got people that are still coming back and using the tool. So that was kind of mind blowing for me. Now, that might have been pretty basic for other people, but I didn't think that was going to happen in 3 months. We couldn't have done that. I mean, we were working with like the Google TensorFlow and the Dialogflow engine for for Alzheimer's research. I couldn't have done this type of personalized responses to family members who had Alzheimer's or some form of dementia. It just didn't exist yet. So for me, that was a mind-blowing experience being able to see if I could replicate myself. And there's now several different within our channel within Procera. We have a lot of vertical markets that we're going after. We've identified people who are experts who 20 plus, 25 plus years of experience in a specific industry that we're pulling out that are basically taking their knowledge out, and we're basically becoming a recording studio for these musicians of their industry, the industry titans, and being able to provide very expert advice based on who they are, their background, what the next steps are. To me, that was not doable until this last 18 months. That was kind of remarkable for me, was just to see if I could clone myself like the Blue Man Stew. Can I do that with a Blue Man insert Quran? Can I Blue Man Quran? Can I Blue Man Abjad? Yes, the answer is yes. And so that was fairly remarkable for me. I don't know if that's mind blowing, but that's been a very interesting research experiment we've now operationalized.
That's very interesting to know actually, and you never know. I mean, with technology, the pace of technology, you never know what is possible these days. So, I guess we'll have to end this episode here. It was great talking with you, Stuart. Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.